Hello, Mr. Bowlby here. Wanted to read to you a little bit from Flora and Ulysses today. This is a story by Kate DiCamillo. She is a best-selling author, John Newbery Medal in this particular book. She wrote lots of amazing, great, fun stories for children, including Winn-Dixie, which is great. Anyways, here we go. Let's get started. Now, a lot of this is got some animated comic-looking pictures there, so I'll have to show you those when they come up. This is kind of a prologue, so it's not chapter 1 yet. In the Tickham kitchen, late on a summer afternoon, you'll see Mr. Tickham delivering this lovely vacuum to his wife, Mrs. Tickham, as she's reading poetry. She doesn't look that excited about it. There we go. Happy birthday to you. What's this, Donald? This is your birthday present. It's a Ulysses Super Suction Multi-Terrain 2000X. Happy birthday! It's a vacuum cleaner. It's a Ulysses 2000X. Yep, it's the crown jewel of vacuums. It features an extra long cord so that absolutely no mess, no dirt is ever out of your reach. It's indoor, outdoor. It goes everywhere. It does everything. Oh, he's so excited. She's just like, goody. She doesn't care. You have to try it out. Turn it on. For heaven's sake, Donald. Please. That's my sound effect for a vacuum cleaner. Whoa, hey now. This just ripped off his pants. Oh dear. Donald, where are your trousers? Pants? I don't know. Anyway. What in the world, Donald? It's multi-terrain. You should try it outside. And that is how it all began, with a vacuum cleaner. Really. Chapter 1, A Natural-Born Cynic. Flora Bell Buckman was in her room at her desk. She was very busy. She was doing two things at once. She was ignoring her mother, and she was also reading a comic book entitled The Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto. Flora, her mother shouted, what are you doing up there? I'm reading, Flora shouted back. Remember the contract, her mother shouted. Do not forget the contract. At the beginning of summer, in a moment of weakness, Flora had made the mistake of signing a contract that said she would work to turn her face away from idiotic hijinks of comics and toward the bright light of true literature. Those were the exact words of the contract. They were her mother's words. Flora's mother was a writer. She was divorced and she wrote romance novels. Talk about idiotic hijinks. Flora hated romance novels. In fact, she hated romance. I hate romance, said Flora out loud to herself. She liked the way the words sounded. She imagined them floating above her in a comic strip bubble. It was a comforting thing to have words hanging over her head. Especially negative words about romance. Flora's mother had often accused Flora of being a natural-born cynic. Flora suspected that this was true. She was a natural-born cynic who lived in defiance of contracts. Yep, thought Flora, that's me. She bent her head and went back to reading about the amazing incandesto. She was interrupted a few minutes later by a very loud noise. It sounded as if a jet plane had landed in the Tickham's backyard. What the heck, said Flora. She got up from her desk and looked out the window and saw Mrs. Tickham running around the backyard with a shiny, oversized vacuum cleaner. It looked like she was vacuuming the yard. That can't be, thought Flora. Who vacuums their yard? Actually, it didn't look like Mrs. Tickham knew what she was doing. It was more like the vacuum cleaner was in charge, and the vacuum cleaner seemed to be out of its mind, or its engine, or something. A few bolts shy of a load, said Flora out loud, and then she saw Mrs. Tickham and the vacuum cleaner were headed directly for a squirrel. Hey now, said Flora. She banged on the window. Watch out, she shouted. You're gonna vacuum up that squirrel. She said the words, and then she had a strange moment of seeing them over her head. You're going to vacuum up that squirrel. There is just no predicting what kind of sentences you might say, thought Flora. For instance, who would ever think you would shout, "You're going to vacuum up that squirrel"? It didn't make any difference, though, what words she said. Flora was too far away. The vacuum cleaner was too loud, and also clearly it was bent on destruction. "This malfeasance must be stopped," said Flora in a deep, superheroic voice. "This malfeasance must be stopped" was what the unassuming janitor Alfred T. Slipper always said before he was transformed into the amazing Incandesto and became a towering, crime-fighting pillar of light. Unfortunately, Alfred T. Slipper wasn't present. Here's a picture of the through the yard with the vacuum cleaner and the squirrel. Where was Incandesto when you needed him? Not that Flora really believed in superheroes, but still, she stood at the window and watched as the squirrel was vacuumed up. Poof! "Holy bagamba," said Flora. Chapter 2. The Mind of a Squirrel. Not much goes on in the mind of a squirrel. Huge portions of what is loosely termed the squirrel brain are given over to one thought: food. The average squirrel cognition goes something like this: "I wonder if there's something to eat." This thought is then repeated in small variations. "Where's the food? Man, I am hungry. Is that a piece of food? And are there more pieces of food? Some 6,000 or 7,000 times a day." All this to say that when the squirrel in the Tickham's backyard got swallowed up by the Ulysses 2000X, there weren't a lot of terribly profound thoughts in his head. As the vacuum cleaner roared toward him, he did not, for instance, think, "Here at last is my fate come to meet me." He did not think, "Oh, please give me one more chance and I'll be good." What he thought was, "Man, I sure am hungry." And then there was a terrible roar and he was sucked right off his feet. Excuse me. At that point, there was no thoughts of the squirrel. There were no thoughts in the squirrel's head, not even thoughts of food. Chapter 3. The Death of a Squirrel. Seemingly swallowing a squirrel was a bit much for even the powerful, indomitable indoor-outdoor Ulysses 2000X. Mrs. Tickham's birthday machine let out an uncertain roar and stuttered to a stop. Mrs. Tickham bent over and looked down at the vacuum cleaner. There was a tail sticking out of it. "For heaven's sake," said Mrs. Tickham, "what next?" She dropped to her knees and gave the tail a tentative tug. She stood. She looked around the yard. "Help," she said. "I think I've killed a squirrel." Chapter 4. A surprisingly helpful cynic. Flora ran from her room. She ran down the stairs. As she ran, she thought, "For a cynic, I am a surprisingly helpful person." She went back out the back door. Her mother called to her. She said, "Where are you going, Flora Belle?" Flora didn't answer. She never answered her mother when she called her Flora Belle. Sometimes she didn't answer her mother when she called her Flora either. Flora ran through the tall grass and cleared the fence between her yard and the Tickhams in a single bound. "Move out of the way," said Flora. She gave Mrs. Tickham a shove, grabbed hold of the vacuum cleaner. It was heavy. She picked it up and shook it. Nothing happened. She shook harder. The squirrel dropped out of the vacuum cleaner. Plop! It landed on the grass. He didn't look that great. He was missing a lot of fur, vacuumed off, Flora assumed. His eyelids fluttered. His chest rose and fell and rose again, and then it stopped moving altogether. Flora knelt. She put her finger on the squirrel's chest. At the back of each issue of the Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto, there's a series of bonus comics. One of Flora's very favorite bonus comics was entitled, "Terrible Things Can Happen to You." As a cynic, Flora found it wise to be prepared. Who knew what horrible, unpredictable things would happen next? Terrible Things Can Happen to You detailed what action to take if you inadvertently consumed plastic fruit. This happened more often than you would suppose. Some plastic fruit was extremely realistic looking. How to perform the Heimlich maneuver on your elderly Aunt Edith if she choked on a stringy piece of steak. at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What to do if you were wearing a striped shirt and a swarm of locusts descended? Run. Locusts eat stripes. And of course, how to administer everyone's favorite life-saving technique, CPR. Terrible things can happen to you. Did not, however, detail exactly how someone was supposed to give CPR to a squirrel. I'll figure it out, said Flora. What will you figure out, said Mrs. Tickum. Flora didn't answer her. Instead, she bent down and put her mouth on the squirrel's mouth. It tasted funny. If you were forced to describe it, she would say it tasted exactly like squirrel. Fuzzy, damp, and slightly nutty. Have you lost your mind, said Mrs. Tickum. Flora ignored her. She breathed into the squirrel's mouth. She pushed down on his small chest. She started to count.